Yeah, Prashant, shall we start off or we'll wait for Rakesh?
We'll wait, sir. He is joining.
Okay, all right. We'll start Prashant because see, every bit makes a difference. Yeah, so let's get going. So as I was saying, when we got cut off, some people will argue that Rousseau was a philosoph or a philosopher. Some people will say he really wasn't, and I gave you that example, the example of Socrates, who is technically a sophist, but he's unlike the other sophists. So you can say Rousseau is a philosopher, but he's unlike the other philosophers. And we will understand this point better as we progress further with this discussion. But one thing is very, very clear, that he is one of the most influential figures uh, in France and in the world in the 18th century. And in fact, some people even say that the inspiration for the French Revolution that happened in 1789 was actually uh, Rousseau. Okay. But that is not something that we can establish, though there are speeches by people like Robespierre, uh, who was the leader of the uh, Jacobin movement. He does talk about democracy, and he does talk about Rousseau. So there is no reason why we should think that that is entirely doubtful. The question may be about how influential was he, but that is something that cannot be answered to with any degree of satisfaction. So, but he's very different from Voltaire. But I was talking to you about Baron de Montesquieu. Baron de Montesquieu misunderstood the British system. Okay, he misunderstood the British system, and he basically uh, thought that there was a separation of powers, while what you find in England is more a fusion of powers. This is where I got cut off. I was basically trying to tell you that if you look at uh, the executive in a parliamentary system, the executive is a part of the legislature, right? So in those days, that wasn't really a legislature, it was only a parliament. I told you the difference. A parliament is a place where you can speak. A legislature is a place where you make laws. Okay, the laws were still made by the king, so you can't really say that the parliament in those days was a legislature. So let's call it a parliament. So the executive is a part of the parliament, and the judiciary is also a part of the parliament, because the highest court of justice in England at that time was the House of Lords. The House of Lords was the highest court. And within the House of Lords, and even if you were still not happy with the pronouncement of justice, you could apply, like today we say, a separate division bench in the Supreme Court of India. Like that, in those days, they had what was called the Star Chamber. Okay, it was called the Star Chamber, and the Star Chamber would then be the final arbitrator of disputes. So Baron de Montesquieu completely misunderstood England. What he saw as checks and balances really didn't exist there. It was up to the Americans actually to pick up his theory. And after the 1776 Declaration of Independence, and the American Revolution is hardly a revolution, but they implemented the separation of powers. It's only in the 20th century that the British basically created a separate institution called the judiciary, and also created a Supreme Court and all that, and took away the judicial powers of the House of Lords. So that is more of a late 19th century, 20th century phenomenon in England. And even today in India as well, uh, it's only the judiciary which is separate. Okay, it's only the judiciary which is separate. But in order to be a member of the executive, you have to be a member of the legislature, either at the state level or at the national level, right? So we don't really have that kind of separation of powers that you see in the United States of America. If you're interested, I'll talk about that as a comparative system, how different the United States of America is. There are positives and there are many, many negatives also to the way in which the separation of powers has been done in the United States of America. But we'll put that aside. So Baron de Montesquieu didn't understand too well. Then there was Voltaire. Voltaire was very different from um, Rousseau. Voltaire was very anti-democracy. He was a pro-monarchy person. Voltaire once very famously said that it is better to be ruled by one lion than to be ruled by 1,000 rats. Okay, so 1,000 rats is to be understood as his idea of democracy. Okay, and one lion is monarchy. But he was also against the feudal system. I told you the feudal system has its rankings. Okay, Baron de Montesquieu was a baron. In English, you will call him a baron, and French it was called baron. Okay, so Voltaire was somebody who would get into all kinds of disputes, and he once got into a dispute with a duke. The duke is a pretty high-ranking feudal lord, and when that man was trying to object to Voltaire, Voltaire was very contemptuous of people who he thought did not have too much interest, too much intelligence. Okay, he was extremely contemptuous of them, and he simply said, "Listen, you're a fool. You might have become a duke, but you're a duke by fluke. It's by birth. You have become a duke. You have done nothing to deserve it. So I say you're a duke by fluke. Whereas I, Voltaire, I am somebody because of my intelligence and the work that I have done. So they had a system called cashiering, which is sending people to jail. So he went to jail for some time. But Voltaire was like that, very, very brash. Now, if you look at Rousseau, Rousseau is very different from all these people. And that is the reason why some people have uh, a little difficulty in calling him a philosoph. Uh, but we'll come back to that, like I said, as we go with things. Rousseau was the writer of very important works, such as his first and very well known work is a discourse on inequality, which is where he pointed out in great detail the paradox or the internal contradiction. Okay, the paradox of poverty amidst plenty. If you remember, when we discussed John Locke, we said the whole of English society had become poor, including the nobles or the feudal lords and the king. But in capitalism, Rousseau saw that there was a paradox as in a contradiction, an internal contradiction. Capitalism was generating wealth, like Locke said it will, no doubt about that. But he said the problem is there is inequality. There is inequality in this plenty. So there's something wrong with this system. So that is it is to be considered as a seminal work. And it is for this reason that he's also sometimes called a political economist, but I wouldn't apply that to him. Okay, some people say that there is an element of political uh, economy in him, but it's negligible, so please don't apply that to him. And similarly, Emile, which got translated into English as On Education, but I prefer the title Emile. Emile is the name of a student. He's an imaginary student. And I told you, Rousseau, apart from Plato, is the only other thinker to emphasize on the importance of education. Okay. And I am one who believes in that. True empowerment of people is giving them quality education. Okay. Giving people quality education empowers them. Giving free electricity, free rice, it'll keep you, it'll keep people like beggars. Doesn't empower them. Okay, and that's why politicians give these things. So Rousseau believed in the power of education. And Emile is a tract that one should understand as something which gives us guidelines about how you should have education. What kind of education should be given to people in order to make them enlightened citizens? So, like I said, apart from Plato, who emphasized on that system of education, Rousseau is the one who also believed in the power of education. My internet connection is unstable, it says. Let's hope it carries on. Now, Confessions is a work that you shouldn't take seriously. When I say you shouldn't take it seriously, what I'm trying to tell you is not to read it or not things like that. Confessions was written by Rousseau with a with an intention to shock people. Rousseau believed that if you tell people things normally sometimes, and if you try to tell people rationally, look, this is wrong, don't do this, then they don't listen to you. So he believed that if you shock somebody, then they'll take notice of you. Okay, if you do something which is extremely unexpected of anyone, if you do something like that, like if I came into your class and took off my shirt, you'll notice me. If I probably just sat and lectured there, you wouldn't notice. Some people will go to sleep, some people will be thinking of something. But if I took off my shirt, people will notice. And that is exactly the kind of things that he talks about. Okay. And though he calls it confessions, and many people originally thought that he had committed all those acts that he says he committed in that book, he didn't commit most of those acts. His idea was to shock people out of the stupor that they were in. Okay, so the confessions are really, really bizarre. They are very, very bizarre, and they are meant to draw the attention of people to more serious issues. Okay, so in that sense, you should not take it seriously as in he's not reporting things that he actually did. He's only saying that I did these things in order to shock people and make them listen to him. That is the purpose of confessions. And then, of course, his most celebrated work, for me personally, the most celebrated work is Emile. Okay, I believe that the real Rousseau is Emile, but most definitely the social contract is definitely his most political and very, very necessary book. It drew attention of people to a number of things which otherwise were not being shown to people. So the social contract, that is the book that we will concentrate our attention upon, because if I had my way, I would also have taught Emile, but we don't have the time. So we'll not do that. We'll go into the social contract. Now, the philosoph tradition. Okay, some people consider him to be a part of the Romanticist tradition. Just take that as what it is today. I'll get into what is Romanticism shortly. Some consider him to be a part of the Romanticist tradition. Some consider him to be a part of the Enlightenment and the Rationalist tradition. Okay, but you should be extremely careful with what exactly do you mean by Enlightenment and Rationalist tradition, because there is no one Enlightenment tradition. Okay, the first Enlightenment tradition, which was the Renaissance, was one Enlightenment, and its effects were felt, like I said, more than in Italy. Definitely, its effects were felt in Italy and the Mediterranean region, but more than that, the effects of that Enlightenment were felt in uh, England. So the true um descendants of Machiavelli, so to speak, are Hobbes and Locke, who are Englishmen. You don't find another Italian philosopher who took forward the agenda of the political as envisioned by Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay, that was done by Thomas Hobbes first and John Locke later. And there is an entire list of philosophers that you can talk about, far too many of them. I will talk about David Hume a little later while we are talking about Rousseau as well. Okay, now, so that's not the only enlightenment. The second enlightenment in Europe happened in France. Okay, so this is called the French Enlightenment. And any enlightenment tradition is based in rationality, because it is our rational ability that allows us to comprehend, to understand various different things. So the French Enlightenment is considerably different from the first Enlightenment. Okay, qualitatively, it is very, very different from the first Enlightenment. If you remember what I told you about the first Enlightenment, you will remember that I said uh, people like Alberti and Bruni, these are people who believed in the greatness of the human being. I told you that it gave birth to this tradition called humanism. Humanism is the celebration of the abilities of man. Okay, it is a celebration of abilities of man. And therefore, I always quote Alberti, and I tell you that he said, God made man in his own image. And Greek and Roman gods are not like me. They are not pot-bellied, fat, useless fellows. They are muscular, athletic, powerful, physically powerful. Okay? They are wonderful to behold. So people say, you look like a Greek god. Not to me. When they see somebody who is really very, very good looking, they say he has Greek god or Roman god good looks, right? So it is a celebration of the physical form of man. It is the celebration of the intellectual ability of man, okay? And also the strength, not necessarily brute strength or brute force, but the ability to tame 1,000 horses, wild horses. Man can tame 1,000 wild horses. That's what Alberti said, if you remember, right? So that is the spirit of the first enlightenment, celebrating the human being and creating a man-centric universe. First, it was the sophists who did it. I hope you remember that. The sophists created a man-centric universe, Protagoras and Anaxagoras, okay? And then you have the Renaissance tradition, Renaissance, rebirth of classical learning of Greece. Those things you see are the ones that will have influenced the first Renaissance, the first Enlightenment, and therefore it is a celebration of the human being and his infinite capabilities. And so that is called the Enlightenment tradition that unleashed humanism and a man-centric universe. Whereas The French Enlightenment is not such a thing at all. It is qualitatively completely different. Now, the French Enlightenment is not again the last Enlightenment. It is something which is a second, it's a sandwich. On one side, you have the original Renaissance. At the other side, you have the German Enlightenment. And sitting between these two forms of enlightenment is the French Enlightenment. Okay, the French Enlightenment preceded the German, oh, um, preceded the French Revolution. This is another thing that I had to tell you. It because of the French Enlightenment only, irrespective of how much credit you want to give to Rousseau, one has to remember that it is the French Enlightenment that paved the way for the French Revolution. The French Revolution, I can teach that for a semester. It's an amazing part of human history. It is what defines our lives today, the positive aspects of our lives. But I'll talk about that in detail as we go along. It preceded the French Revolution, and it also preceded the German Enlightenment, which came in the 19th century. It came more towards the end of the 18th century, but spilled over considerably into the 19th century. There are a number of influences of the French Enlightenment and the French Revolution on the German Enlightenment tradition. So there must be some, if there are influences, and there must be some commonalities. So what are the commonalities? The first commonality between the French and the German enlightenments is the existence of a pessimistic side. Unlike the first enlightenment, the Renaissance, which celebrated the, what should I say? It celebrated the abilities of the human being. You will, and was so optimistic about the future of human civilization. It was completely optimistic about the uh, as a human civilization. Sorry, the future of the humankind. That is not to be found in the French and in the German Enlightenment traditions. They are pessimistic. Okay, pessimism is the opposite of optimism. Optimism is when you believe you can do something. Pessimism is something which is which can be skepticism. I don't think it can be done is a pessimistic statement. I am very sure that it can't be done is also a pessimistic statement. I don't think lives will get better with technology is a pessimistic statement. Okay, so that is pessimism. Now, the influence of uh, pessimism is more clearly visible in art forms such as paintings and sculpture. Okay, and Romanticism that we talked about, this Romanticism is based in pessimism of the French Enlightenment. Okay, it is based in the uh, uh, pessimism of the French Enlightenment tradition. Now, like I said, it is more visible in the case of what we call the art forms, and especially painting and sculpture, as far as French uh, Romanticism is concerned. Okay. Uh, if you look at the works of the most well-known of the French painters, there's another Rousseau whose name is Henri, Henri, Henry. They pronounce it as Henri. Henri Rousseau was also a pessimistic romanticist. And the romanticists, incidentally, called themselves the realists. Okay, they said their pessimism should not be seen as unreal. They believe that they are realistic and not unrealistic like the original enlightenment, the first enlightenment. So, if you look at people like the best example for the French tradition is Theodore Jericho. Okay, it's written Gary Colt, but it is pronounced Jericho. Jericho was a multi-dimensional person. He was a lithographer apart from being a painter. Lithography, I hope you know what it is, but just in case you don't, I'll explain it very quickly. Lithography is taking a smooth stone or rock or a metal which is very smooth and painting things on it and printing them on something. You could print it on a cloth or you could print it on a wall, wherever. That is actually called lithography. And Theodore Jericho was a lithographer. But I have also mentioned another name here, which is Joseph Mallard William Turner, more commonly known as JMW Turner, but or people simply say the Romanticist painter Turner. Turner belonged to England. So please don't be under the impression that this pessimism did not reach England. It reached England. Humean skepticism is also a result of this pessimism having reached England. Okay. And it called itself. Guys, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, does it mean I'll get extra time? Because it was showing 9 minutes. So, anyway, let's see. Uh, so, it reached England as well. And I'll talk about how the Romanticist movement worked, because you have to understand that in order to understand uh, Rousseau. If you have to decide whether he's a Romanticist or not, we have to understand this. The brunt of Romanticism didn't go to England. That much is true. But quite a bit of it went, especially in arts such as painting. Apart from uh, Turner, Joseph Mallard William Turner, apart from him, you also have another painter who is called John Constable. It's a funny name, Constable. Somebody in his family must have been a constable. And then there is this very, very well known poet whose poems you must have studied in school, daffodils and things like that. Okay, and he was an Englishman and he was a supporter of the French Revolution at one time. Later on, after it became a reign of terror, he said, I don't support this anymore. So, another British poet called Robert Browning castigated Wordsworth for withdrawing his support to the French Revolution. But he was also a romanticist. Now, what is it that you see in Wordsworth? I have once quoted to you his lines written a few miles over Tintern Abbey, where he first describes the beauty of the nature of Tintern Abbey. Okay, it's just a description of the beauty of the Tintern Abbey. And in all that description, it's a very long poem. It runs into 4 or 5 pages. And in that description, there is one particular line that stands out, which says, behind all this beauty that is in front of me, from somewhere I can hear the still sad music of humanity. Okay, so Wordsworth was somebody who was bemoaning the loss of natural beauty, the loss, the LOSs, loss of connections between human beings, the mechanical way of life, the pollution that industries were bringing. So, if you look at all those things, he saw a sadness there. He didn't see a happiness there. He saw a sadness. He said, this is not progress. This is not progress. And his attempt always was to tell how glorious nature is. So he concentrated his attention on nature, not on the human being, which is what humanism does. So he's a naturalist, not in the biological sense of the term, but in the nature sense of the term. Naturalism is one of the important and striking features of Romanticism. So it did go into Great Britain as well. In Germany, Romanticism went even before the German Enlightenment. And the original Enlightenment, the first Enlightenment, generated a form of art and architecture which was called Baroque, Baroque. Okay, Baroque Art and Architecture. So if you look at paintings which are of the Baroque period, it should be Baroque, not Baroque. Baroque period, if you look at the paintings of, say, somebody like Peter Paul Rubens, the painting is a picture of complete harmony. There is a beautiful house. The sun is shining for us. Please remember, in India, the sun we think is not a thing that we want. We would like to see clouds, especially the closer we are getting to summer. Somebody like me, the closer we are getting to summer, I start wondering, oh my God, what is going to happen? Okay. So, but in England and in the European countries in general, especially the Western European countries, the sun is a rare commodity, and a bright sunlight is indication of optimism. So there is nice sunlight. There is a pond in front of the house. Children are playing with paper boats. People are happy. The faces in the paintings, there are different people doing different things. They are happy. There are nice trees. So it is a scenic beauty. Peter Paul Rubens, Rubens, he represents this better than anybody else from the